Welcome to another Wisdom Podcast with Robin Hanson. Robin is an associate professor of economics at George Mason University. Today, we're hopefully going to talk in less than 20 minutes about an array of topics ranging from fertility to AI, prediction markets, the sacred and grabby aliens. So this podcast is brought to you by podpire.com. That is my podcasting agency if you want to start, scale, be invited to podcasts like this one. Robin, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and about what is it that you do nowadays.
Hello, nice to meet you, Charles. I'm a tenured professor, so I have a lot of freedom about how I spend my time. So I try to find the most neglected important topics where I can find an angle to make progress and think about them. For the last few months, that's mostly been fertility, though for the year before that, it was mostly the sacred. For the few years before that, it was grabby aliens. And I've spent many years thinking about prediction markets and alternative institutions. And I have two books, one on the age of M, where love and life and robots rule the earth, the other on the elephant in the brain, hidden motives in everyday life. So I'm interested in puzzles, especially important ones that we could figure out and think through.
Love that. Let's start with fertility. What has been surprising for you? What have been your findings in that field that you can share?
Well, fertility is falling. It's going to keep falling. It's a very robust phenomenon. Most civilizations that have noticed it and complained about it haven't fixed it. So we're probably not going to fix it either. As fertility falls, population will peak and then fall, and then the whole world economy will fall. And then innovation will grind to a halt as the economy becomes much smaller than its peak value. Basically, it will seem as if hardly anything is happening in terms of innovation. And then the most dramatic thing is that the main way that this will be fixed in the long run is that small, insular, fertile subcultures, mostly fundamentalist religious ones like the Amish or the Mennonites or the Haredi Jews, they have high fertility. They can keep it going because they're very insular, and they will just come to dominate the earth the way the Christians came to dominate the Roman Empire, because this is how that happened 2,000 years ago. Basically, the Christians just outbred the rest of the Roman Empire. They didn't convert them, they just outbred them. And after 300 years, doubling every 40 years was enough for the Christians to take over. And that's what's going to happen in our world. If there are things you value in our civilization, you'll have to find a way to pass them on to those our descendants, the Amish, Haredi Jews, people like that, because they're pretty picky and they don't accept a lot of things, and they throw a lot of things away that we value. But if you want something to last, you'll have to convince them to pick it up.
What about my religion, which is that God is an AGI, and my cult will be just a bunch of bots and AIs and very much enhanced humans? Wouldn't I have a superiority qualitatively and quantitatively over the Amish with my trillions of AIs?
If you can develop human level AI before the great innovation pause, in 30, 50 or so years, then you win, and the world economy no longer depends on humans. It depends on the AIs, and our descendant AIs go on from there. But that's a big challenge. And as you may know, many people are eager to slow down AI development these days. And you've got a deadline. If you don't reach full human level AI by that deadline, then it'll be several centuries, maybe even 5 centuries before you get another chance.
Interesting. What happened at OpenAI recently, and what does that tell us about the humanity and AI?
Well, it's just one small company that had a usual power struggle. Some people have framed that power struggle in terms of people who were cautious about rapid development versus not. If so, that was a win for the rapid development side, because that's how the labels came out of the people who won. I don't know if that's in fact the actual correspondence inside. Almost all power struggles, people have to give some sort of grand altruistic justification for their mostly personal power struggles, but this is weak evidence that people are not going to greatly restrain AI in the near future, which is good news, I would say, but it's one small piece of evidence. There was some report that there was some technical advance that prompted the power struggle. And that's good news too, if it's true.
Or incredibly bad news for cryptography, for example. But what were the biases at play here? Because I also think it's a power struggle. Yes, there could have been a cause of the freak out, right? But in the end, I think it was mostly motivated by a power struggle, which mostly involves fear and aggression and dominance. So what were the biases at play here?
Well, obviously, the usual bias at play in power struggles is the confident belief each person has that they represent the larger interest of the industry, the firm, or the world, or something, and they are fighting for the good. And they can't all be fighting for the good. Somebody's got to be wrong. So their confidence is a bias they're each pretty confident they're not the one who's wrong.
What's going to happen with Russia and Ukraine, and what's going to happen with Israel and Hamas?
Well, obviously, the main thing that's happened with Russia and Ukraine in the last few years is that Russia attacked and was expected to initially win, but wasn't lucky in that way. And then the world has sort of piled up lots of resources in supporting Ukraine and sent lots of arms and advice and everything. And that seems to be sufficient to make a deadlock. And the question is, how long will that deadlock hang on? They could have sued for peace initially, and we probably should sue for peace now, but we're not, apparently. And there's the continuing risk that the war will escalate to a nuclear war even, and that's a serious risk that we should be thinking about, and that's a reason we should sue for peace, but people are not very much in the mood to make peace. Clearly in the Israel situation, similarly, it's a very long-standing conflict. One side initiated an attack with the expectation there would be a retaliation, and perhaps in part exactly to induce that retaliation, and then they can complain that it isn't fair and isn't nice retaliation that's happening, and probably isn't. The most striking fact is that the world has lined up sending resources to this conflict, just like with Ukraine and Russia. So the world could have just treated these as isolated things and let them deal with their own problems, but instead the world's joined these battles. And so that's going to be a lot of resources devoted to them. And people have speculated that the US only has limited resources to support these things. And then if China, say, were to attack Taiwan at the moment, we would find ourselves strained to respond there, and they could be tempted to do that because of the situation. They probably won't, but it does make sense that they should be more tempted now.
Tricky situation. It's kind of a if it's like a bank run phenomena, but for war, right? Like if everyone pulls at the same time, then you're into big trouble as the hegemony and that someone that has the monopoly on the world's power right now. It's not even multipolar, I'd argue. The sacreds, what were your findings in studying the topic and probably experimenting with stuff? Why, and what has been your findings with everything that entails to the sacred?
So I have a religious background in that my parents were pastors and missionaries, and my mom writes lots of Christian tween books, and my brothers are religious. So I have a strong religious background, but I became atheist in college and didn't look back much since then. And so the sacred hasn't been a central part of my life, at least consciously. But in the last years, as I've tried to promote various innovation designs, I've gotten the pushback that I'm messing with the sacred and that I should be wary about it. And I finally decided, let's figure this thing out. What is this thing that's in my way? This thing, the sacred. So I'm more of a theorist. And so my track was to just try to review all the things people said about the sacred, all the claims people made about what tends to correlate with this phenomena, and then collect the theories I could find that had been offered to explain that, and then come up with my better alternative theory that I would say better explains these various correlates. So I came up with a list of 68 correlates of the sacred. I have a paper on the subject. And then I collected those into 7 themes, 7 bundles of correlates. And those are the main things I'm trying to explain. So the 7 bundles are: we highly value the sacred. We show that we value the sacred through our emotions and our actions and sacrifice. We are bound together into groups with other people by our shared concept and vision of the sacred. We tend to idealize things that we see as sacred. We simplify them and purify them and make them last longer, etc., in our minds. We separate the sacred. We like to have clear, sharp lines drawn between sacred and non-sacred things and don't like them to be mixed together. And we have a norm that you're supposed to feel and intuit the sacred rather than consciously calculate it. That's a norm in terms of how you're supposed to have an attitude toward it. And then finally, we have somewhat abstract sacred concepts that touch something very concrete, and then those concrete things become sacred by association. So a love letter can become a sacred representation of love, a flag, a sacred representation of a nation, etc. There's a process by which concrete things become sacred. A battleground becomes sacred by association with a sacred battle. And that's an important element of how we can have a very potent, personal, concrete connection to what are often pretty abstract things. So those are the main 7 correlates of the sacred. That is the bundles of correlates that I've called themes. And then the challenge is to explain these 7 things. And the first 3 are actually explained by a theory offered by one of the founders of the field of sociology, Emil Durkheim, over a century ago. And his story was the essence of religion was the sacred, and the essence of the sacred was groups being bound together by their shared view of the sacred. That was the 3rd theme I described, and that directly predicts the first 2. If groups are binding together over a shared view of the sacred, then they will value the sacred highly and go out of their way to show how much they value the sacred through their emotions and their sacrifice. So those 3 together make sense, and they explain 3 of the 7 categories of correlates of the sacred. But they leave the other 4 unexplained. The sharp separation, the idealization, the feeling, not thinking, and the concrete by touching the abstract. So those other 4, the question is, how can we understand those and explain those? And I realized that a powerful theory in psychology called Construal level theory could naturally help us understand these other 4 themes when combined with this Durkheim theory of groups binding bound together. So the key thing to notice is that humans tend to think about things that we see around us and whatever we think about in 2 different ways in a continuum between, either abstractly or concretely. So when you look at a visual scene, you tend to see a few big things up close, and then lots of little things far away. And the little things far away, you tend to think of abstractly without much detail and without much thought. And then the few things you up close, you think about concretely with more detail. And that's just part of this pattern. So in general, we have this habit where anything we think of abstractly, we think of it as far away in all the possible senses, in space and time and hypotheticality and planning, abstraction, and things that we see as up close, we tend to think about as near in all the other ways as well. And so this habit of seeing things either up close or far away, depending on our relationship to them, turns out to be an obstacle to groups seeing things as sacred. So if you and I see medicine as sacred, but you're sick and I'm not, if your being sick made you think about medicine differently and your illness differently, then you and I would have an obstacle to seeing it the same. So this habit of seeing things differently up close versus far away is an obstacle to this fundamental sacred goal of being bound together by seeing some things the same. So my hypothesis is that for some things that it's important enough for us to see it the same on, we choose to see them as if from afar, even when we're close. So with auto repair, for example, you're quite willing to see the details of auto repair and be critical of your auto repair person and maybe put it off if you don't need it. But medicine, we've decided to see as sacred. It's important for our community to bind together through a shared view of medicine. And so with medicine, we instead see medicine as if from afar, even when we're close. So we find it hard to look at the details of medicine and our illness. And we tend to want to just trust the doctor and think abstractly about it. And that makes us make worse decisions about medicine. We're less critical, we're less analytic, but we do share more agreement about medicine, and we bind together more effectively about medicine through our treating it as sacred, as if from afar. Another example would be sex versus love. So sex is something that's very, once it's in your face, you guessingly focus attention on it, it changes how you're thinking about it. And you think about it very differently when it's up close to you versus far away. Love, on the other hand, is something that people think about abstractly. And so they think about it more sacredly. And we do treat love as more sacred than sex. And love is something that we tend to agree on. We all agree love is good, but we don't tend to agree on any one case, whether that's love, because we find it hard to look at its details up close and focus on them and anchor on that. So love is sacred, sex is not. And we find it hard to think about whether we're in love or what sort of thing constitutes love, but we all agree that love is great. Sex, on the other hand, we very much know when it's proximate, but we don't agree on whether it's good, or at least we disagree much more often about who having sex with who is good. And so, therefore, it's less sacred. So the story here is, so the highest level story is everybody has things they treat as sacred. You do, I do. You're not going to get rid of that. You might as well face up to the fact that it's a real power in everyone's lives. And it's achieving this important social function of having groups being bound together. And that's an important thing for everyone. And so you treat some things as sacred exactly to bind together with other people you associate with around the same values. And the main choices you have might be over which things you treat as how sacred. And we can think about maybe which things it would be better to treat as sacred or not, but you're not really going to have an option not to treat anything that way. I think everybody treats something that way. And this will help you understand why it's there, what it's doing, and how to make peace with it, how to make a compromise, and maybe even find value and power in it.
Some people view aliens as sacred. It's even a religion. Tell us, last but not least, about grabby aliens.
When you look out in the universe, it looks dead and empty. And you got to wonder, are we alone? Is there anyone anywhere out there, anything like us? So that's been a long topic of discussion. And most people think of it as just a pure speculation. Nobody knows anything about it. So anybody's ideas are as good as anybody else. So I and my colleagues are saying, no. We have a 3-parameter model of where aliens are in space-time, and each of those parameters is fit to data we have. So then we have the answer to the question, where are aliens in space-time? Now we're focused on a particular kind of alien who would be very visible. Not some tiny little alien who just hangs around on one planet for a little while and then goes away. These are aliens who, once they get going, they expand and they take over neighboring star systems and they keep expanding and they just change stuff in a way that would be really big and visible. That kind of alien we can confront with our observations. One of our key observations, we don't see any of them out there, but that's data. That's important data. And that's one of the pieces of data that we fit in to estimate our 3-parameter model. And our 3-parameter model says basically grabby aliens, the sort that would expand like that. We might become one of those soon in the next million years. Maybe we won't, but that sets one of our parameters, which is our current date, sets how often, when they appear, when they do appear, because we assume we are a typical date for their appearance. They appear at random points in space, and our model says roughly once per million galaxies. And then when they expand at a large fraction of the speed of light. And that's what we will do too if we become one. And then if we go out there and do that, we will meet them in roughly 1 billion years. So we have the answer to these fundamental questions. Where are they? How far away are they? When will we meet them? Well, they appear once per million galaxies. We'll meet them in roughly 1 billion years if we go out and meet them. And that's the answer to where are the aliens in space-time.
What's your belief? I mean, to me, it's pretty obvious that there's life out there. The probabilities of not is 0.
Sure, but that's easy to say without saying much. But the point is, no, we can tell you a lot more. We can give you the numbers. We can tell you how frequent they are.
But that's like science, right? And mathematics, which we also invented.
Sure.
It just feels that looking at basic gut feeling, which comes from crunching massive amounts of data, it's just impossible that there's no other life out there. And yes, we can make human comparisons. Like if we see an alien, is it like a very advanced life form that fucked up basically in showing themselves? Sure, but just like the belief that you explain with religion and so forth, I think we do adapt or beliefs with our current reality. You know, me, I want to see aliens, and also some people.
Our
don't
analysis
want to
suggests you
see-
probably won't see them anytime soon. That is, you won't see them for another 1 billion years. So that's a long wait. If you were in a hurry to see them soon, we're not giving you hope there.
Yeah, well, it's AGI itself is alien. ChatGPT is somewhat alien.
Sure,
you know?
we will become aliens to ourselves, and we already are aliens to our ancestors. We have changed enormously over time, and our ancestors would be shocked to see what we have become, and we will be shocked to see what our descendants become. That's certainly something we can be pretty confident of, because we've already changed an enormous amount.
Yeah, because it's like me, I want to see them. I want to meet them. I'm curious. Some people don't want to see them because it's very scary, right? But it's just like death, you know? We're so scared of it. We don't want to think about it. Most would say it's inevitable. What do you think about death, cryogenic, and longevity to close this off?
I am a cryonics customer, which is where they will freeze my head when medical science gives up on me, and then I hope to come back. And I had pretty high hopes for cryonics working until I learned about this fertility pause that's upcoming. And so unfortunately, if we're going to have a several centuries pause on innovation, then it'll be a lot harder for my frozen head to stay frozen for several centuries until they finally get around to improving technology and then being able to revive me. So I'm afraid it's going to be asking for more of the world to make me last that way. But I certainly think that eventually we will produce a kind of immortality, but it will be an in principle immortality. So today, houses and cars are immortal. You can keep repairing a house or a car indefinitely, but we usually don't. We don't usually find it worth the bother. And that will be similarly true for our descendants in immortality. Once they achieve immortality, it will be a possible immortality if they keep paying for it, but they probably won't keep paying for it. But now it'll be how much immortality can you afford, and not just an inevitable death.
Or just UBI with the event of AGI, or do I even need your cells? You know, once I crack space and time, can come back in time, I can take a saliva particle and revive you. I think, my perception of what's possible or not is also biased in the fact that I want to be part of that race, and I believe in the course of my own action. And a pause and innovation seems odd because in my head it's like, yeah, I'm probably gonna live forever and I'm never gonna stop innovating. And there's a bunch of people like myself around the world. But again, there's bias, right? That's my own very, very biased self. But I mean, I have the bias of
And-
action. Let's call it that
I
way.
mean, I very much recommend having energy and action and trying to do things in the world. If optimistic bias is what you require to do that, then I guess I will grant that to you. Fine, take your optimistic bias if that's what it takes for you to go out and do stuff. If you could be willing to do stuff and have an accurate estimate, then why we should sit down and ask what the most accurate estimate is. But if you're not up to that, then fine, take your optimism and go. But the most important things is go do something.
Yeah, that's a good message to end the pod. And I think just practicing the prediction muscle is very good because the more you predict, the more you can
Sure, practice
self-reflect.
to predict, but
analyze.
then practice checking your predictions.
There
That's
you
the
go.
important second muscle to get into the habit of looking back and asking, how did they go?
Right. And analysis, conclusion, and then more hypothesis of these conclusions, and eventually get growth, and life
It is
becomes fun.
It is very sobering to make a bunch of very sincere, thoughtful predictions and then 10 years later reevaluate them and realize how many things you missed.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And then from then on, you are going to be more cautious.
Yeah,
You'll be
10
more
years
careful about your
especially.
predictions.
Yes. Where can we find out more about you, Robin?
I have a website, hanson.gmu.edu, and you can learn pretty much anything about me there.